The millionaire's twin daughters were blind until the new maid changed everything. In the grand estate of the Hayes family in Vermont, the soft golden glow of a crystal chandelier did little to chase away the darkness that weighed heavily on Alexander Hayes's heart. At 45, he had once built magnificent structures, architectural marvels admired around the world. But now, behind the hollow eyes of a sleepless man, he was nothing more than a broken father, crushed beneath the merciless fate of his family. Mr. Hayes, I must ask you to accept this reality. Dr. Collins's voice carried the weight of a final sentence, each word landing like an unappealable verdict. Your daughters will never see. Nothing can change that. Those words pierced Alexander like a blade pressed against an old wound. 8 years earlier, he had lost his beloved wife during childbirth, leaving him to carry 2 fragile newborn girls home alone. Back then, the only comfort he had was in the tiny eyes of Lily and Emma. But within months, doctor after doctor confirmed the same diagnosis. The twins were blind from birth. Alexander had refused to accept it. He traveled tirelessly, from Boston to New York to prestigious clinics in Switzerland. He spent millions on experimental surgeries and cutting-edge therapies. Yet time after time, every spark of hope was extinguished. And now Dr. Collins, the most renowned specialist of them all, had closed the final door, declaring nothing more could ever be done. Upstairs, Lily and Emma huddled together after yet another round of exhausting examinations. At only 8 years old, they had already grown accustomed to tears, accustomed to the eternal night that seemed to define their lives. From time to time, their muffled sobs drifted downward, twisting Alexander's heart until it felt ready to shatter. He had hired one caregiver after another, but none lasted more than 3 months. Each left with the same feeling of futility, unable to reach the twins' shut-off world. Alexander stepped toward the window, staring out at the perfectly manicured garden. Rows of blossoms burst into color, yet none of their beauty could reach him. The world outside felt locked away behind a veil of gray fog. The celebrated architect, once a master of light, now stood powerless before the darkness consuming his own home. The intercom buzzed, cutting through the suffocating silence. His housekeeper's voice carried a message. Mr. Hayes, there is a new candidate for the housekeeper position. Her name is Miriam Adler. Alexander exhaled heavily, shoulders sagging under invisible weight. Just another one, another face who would come and go like all the rest. He no longer expected anything, no miracle, no breakthrough. Only the dull ache of a father who had lost faith in the possibility of hope. In the grand foyer of the Hayes estate, Alexander descended the marble staircase with weary, reluctant steps. In his mind, it was just another meaningless interview in a long chain of bleak days. But as his eyes fell on the woman waiting below, something within him faltered. Miriam Adler stood quietly, holding a simple folder in her hands. She wore a modest dark dress, her brown hair pulled back neatly, no makeup to polish her appearance. Unlike the others who had come before, she did not attempt to dazzle or impress. Instead, she carried an unusual calm, the bearing of someone who had faced hardship and learned to endure. Alexander offered a curt greeting and gestured for her to sit opposite him. Yet, before he could speak, the familiar sound of muffled sobs drifted down from upstairs. Lily and Emma were still crying after a long morning of examinations. Miriam's head lifted slightly, her eyes tightening at the sound. "Those are your daughters?" she asked softly, her voice trembling yet firm. Alexander hesitated. Few ever dared to address the girls so directly. He nodded, answering with exhaustion heavy in his tone. "They were born blind. I've taken them to the best doctors. There's nothing more to be done." For a moment Miriam said nothing. Then she gave a slow nod. In her eyes, Alexander glimpsed something he hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not discomfort, but a quiet defiance, as though she refused to believe in the phrase, nothing more. As the interview proceeded, Miriam spoke little of herself. She mentioned working with families, caring for both children and the elderly. Yet what struck Alexander was not her resume, but the way she listened. She never interrupted, never tried to boast. Each time the girls' cries echoed from above, her eyes shimmered faintly, as if she shared their pain. Alexander sighed inwardly. He thought, she too will eventually leave like all the others. But one detail unsettled him. When he asked why she had chosen this job, Miriam replied quietly, "I believe every child deserves to see the light, through their eyes or through their heart." The words froze Alexander in place. For years, every applicant had spoken of duties, salaries, working conditions. No one had ever mentioned light. No one had spoken of the heart. For a brief moment, Alexander felt something stir, not belief, but memory. He remembered his wife, who once said, "Light is always around us, if only someone dares to seek it." Drawing a deep breath, he signed the contract almost without thought. Miriam bowed her head in thanks. Neither of them realized that, in that very instant, an invisible door had creaked open. She was not there merely to dust the quiet halls of his house. She had come to ignite something long buried, something he thought was gone forever. Miriam Adler, her name would soon become the bridge between darkness and light in the Hayes family. The next morning, as the sun peeked through the tall trees of the vast garden, Miriam began her first day of work. She moved quietly through the long corridors adorned with architectural sketches, Alexander's legacy. Yet none of those works of art could lift the heavy silence weighing upon the house. Soon she heard the familiar sound of crying from the second floor. Her heart tightened. Setting aside her cleaning duties, she followed the sound by instinct. The door was ajar, revealing a large but dimly lit room. Heavy curtains blocked nearly all light, leaving only a few weak rays to seep through. In the corner, two small girls sat in oversized armchairs, rocking gently forward and back. It was not play. It was a repetitive, hollow motion, the sign of pain buried too deep. Across the room sat a middle-aged nurse, more absorbed in her phone than in the children. When the sobs grew louder, she muttered coldly, "Enough of that. Crying won't change anything. You're blind. You need to accept it." Miriam felt her blood boil. She clenched her fists, fighting to control her anger. Memories of her great-grandmother's stories returned. Children in concentration camps had cried the same way when hope had slipped away. And her great-grandmother had always said, "Even in the darkest night, you must never abandon the fight." When the nurse finally left for the kitchen, Miriam stepped inside. She moved carefully, not wanting to frighten the girls. "Hello, my dears," she said, her voice soft as a breeze. "I'm Miriam. I've come to help take care of the house." Both girls stopped rocking. Lily, the more cautious of the two, whispered, "Where's Mrs. Linda? She's always here?" "She's gone to the kitchen," Miriam replied gently, edging closer. "I'm tidying a few rooms. Would you like to keep me company for a little while?" Emma tilted her head with faint curiosity. "You sound different. Your voice is strange." Miriam smiled. "That's true. My family came from far away, a place where people endured many hardships. But there, they taught me something. There is always a ray of light, even when everything seems dark." The atmosphere began to shift. Miriam sat on the carpet and talked about simple things: the birds outside the window, the faint smell of bread drifting from the kitchen, the softness of the sofa's fabric. Slowly, Lily and Emma responded, their tiny mouths forming shy, fragile smiles. Then Miriam noticed something unusual. When she moved to the right, Lily turned her head precisely in that direction. When she shifted left, Emma did the same. Both frowned when Miriam stepped between them and the curtain, blocking what little light seeped through. "There's something different here," Emma whispered. Miriam's heartbeat quickened. She kept her composure, continuing the conversation as though nothing had happened. Yet inside, a flame of hope ignited. Perhaps, just perhaps, the girls were not entirely blind. Moments later, the nurse returned, her voice sharp. "What are you doing here?" Mr. Hayes made it clear the girls' routine must not be disturbed. Miriam offered a calm smile, answering diplomatically. "I was only talking with them. Every child needs someone to listen." But as she stepped out, her heart was still pounding. She had seen it, clear reactions no doctor had ever mentioned, and she knew she could not ignore it. That day, for the first time in months, Alexander heard the sound of faint laughter from his daughter's room. He froze on the staircase, bewildered. He didn't yet realize that in that room, Miriam had planted a seed of hope, ready to grow. In the days that followed, Miriam slowly adjusted to the rhythm of life at the Hayes estate. She was more than a housekeeper. She became a quiet observer of every detail in Lily and Emma's behavior. She noticed that whenever she passed by a window where light seeped through, the girls often turned their heads toward it. At times, when she moved her hand in front of them without touching, they paused, as if sensing the fleeting shadow. These signs would not let Miriam rest. She recalled that first conversation when Emma had whispered, "There's something different here." That innocent remark had become a crucial clue, pushing Miriam to believe that reality was not as final as Dr. Collins had claimed. One afternoon, while Alexander was away at a meeting, Miriam was assigned to tidy his study. In a desk drawer, she stumbled upon a stack of old medical files. On the covers, the names were clear: Lily Hayes, medical report, and Emma Hayes, medical report. Her heart pounded as she turned the yellowed pages. The very first report, written just after the twins' birth, contained a small note. Possible response to weak light. Further observation recommended. But as Miriam flipped through the reports from later years, the note had vanished completely. Instead, the diagnosis was written with unwavering certainty. Congenital blindness. Irreversible. Miriam frowned. Why would such an important observation disappear? Had it been overlooked? Or worse, intentionally erased? Closing the file, she felt a chill run through her veins, mingled with anger. Something about the doctor's approach was deeply wrong. The reactions she had witnessed with her own eyes could not be dismissed as mere coincidence. That night, Miriam lay awake on her small bed. The wind whistled through the cracks, reminding her of her great-grandmother's stories, how truths had been buried simply because they were inconvenient for those in power. Her great-grandmother had taught her, sometimes, to protect a child, you must dare to confront the lies of adults. Miriam knew she was stepping into dangerous territory. Yet when she thought of Lily and Emma's shy laughter during their first encounter, she understood she could not turn away. If there was even a spark of hope, she would uncover the truth, no matter how high the walls of authority stood against her. 2 days later, Dr. Collins returned to the Hayes estate for a routine checkup. He entered with the familiar air of a man accustomed to power, confident stride, commanding voice, and eyes that suggested nothing in the world could challenge him. Alexander received him in the parlor, Miriam standing quietly in the background. When Collins asked about Lily and Emma's condition, Alexander merely shook his head with a flat tone. He had grown used to hearing the same conclusion repeated for 8 long years. But Miriam could not remain silent. She remembered the girls' unusual reactions, the missing note in their files. Her heart raced, yet her voice was steady. "Doctor, I believe something isn't right." Collins snapped his head toward her, his gaze sharp and cutting. His voice dripped with disdain. "Excuse me? And who are you to question my diagnosis?" Miriam drew a deep breath. "I'm only the housekeeper, but I've seen the girls respond to light. When I stood in front of the window, they noticed immediately. I believe perhaps they are not as blind as you say." The room fell into silence. Alexander stiffened in surprise, while Collins let out a cold laugh. The reaction of a child is not medical evidence. You should know your place. Don't fill their father's head with false hope. Miriam stood firm. I'm not offering false hope. I simply believe no child should be left in despair if there's even the smallest ray of light to believe in. Collins's voice hardened, nearly shouting. You have no training, no qualifications. I've dedicated my entire career to this field. And you think you've seen something that 15 of the world's best doctors all overlooked? Alexander sat motionless, his hands tightening together. He didn't know whom to trust, the celebrated physician he had relied upon for years, or the stranger who had only been in his home for days, yet spoke with unshakable conviction. Miriam met Collins's eyes directly, her voice unwavering. I am not a doctor, but I know something you seem to have forgotten. Children need love, and they need someone to believe in them. And what if you're wrong, doctor? What if you've missed even the smallest chance to change their lives? Collins hesitated briefly at her boldness, then scoffed and waved her off. Enough. I don't waste time arguing with housemaids. Mr. Hayes, control your staff. He stormed out in anger, leaving the room thick with tension. Alexander sat in silence, torn and confused. Miriam, though she knew she had just challenged a powerful force, felt the flame of hope within her burn brighter than ever. 3 days after her confrontation with Dr. Collins, Miriam could not stop thinking about Lily and Emma's strange reactions. The more she reflected, the more she believed there was still a spark of light hidden within their seemingly blind eyes. But how could she prove it? One morning, while Alexander was busy with a video conference and Nurse Linda had gone out to buy medicine, Miriam decided to take a daring step. She opened the small bag she had carried since her first day at the Hayes estate. Inside, among a few personal items, lay a precious keepsake, an old flashlight once used by her great-grandmother during the war to test children's response to light. She had called it the game of shadows and colors. Miriam tiptoed into the girls' room. Lily and Emma sat quietly, their faces heavy with the same sadness as always. But when they heard her familiar footsteps, they both turned their heads in unison. "Hello, my loves," Miriam said gently. "Today, I want to play a special game with you. It's a family secret. No one else knows." The blind eyes tilted toward her voice. Emma leaned her head curiously. "What kind of game?" Miriam lifted the flashlight, then pulled out several handkerchiefs of different colors, red, blue, yellow. She whispered, "This is the light game. I'll shine the light through these scarves, and you tell me what feels different." She began simply, blocking the sunlight from the window with her hand. Lily frowned slightly and whispered, "Something just got darker." Miriam's heart pounded, but her tone remained calm. She turned on the flashlight, shining it through the red scarf. The glow cast across the wall. Emma giggled. "This one feels warm." Switching to the blue scarf, Lily shivered softly. "This one feels cooler, like water." Miriam gripped the flashlight tightly. Tears pricked her eyes, though she kept them hidden. The girls were not trapped in total darkness. They sensed changes in light, even distinguishing different tones. For 20 minutes, Miriam continued the experiment, shifting the light's position, casting playful shadows with her hands. Each time, Lily and Emma responded with uncanny accuracy. Their laughter rang out, pure and bright, sounds the house had not heard in far too long. Then footsteps echoed in the hallway. Miriam's heart leapt. She quickly switched off the flashlight and stuffed the scarves into her bag. The door swung open. Nurse Linda stood there, frowning at the scene. "What are you doing in here?" she barked. Miriam offered a calm smile. "Just telling them a story." Linda huffed, unconvinced, but said nothing more. Still, suspicion lingered in her eyes. Miriam knew she could not hide this forever. That night, sitting alone in her small room, Her hands still trembled with emotion. She had discovered the truth, a truth that could change Lily and Emma's lives. But she also knew that from this moment on, she had stepped into a real battle. That night, Miriam could hardly sleep. The image of Lily and Emma sensing the light, their innocent laughter, these moments burned like a flame inside her. But alongside the joy came relentless worry. She knew that with only intuition and a few simple experiments, she could never convince Alexander or stand against Dr. Collins' authority. She needed an ally, someone with both expertise and trust. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then dialed. On the other end, a young woman's voice answered, "Miriam? My goodness, it's been so long since I heard your voice." It was Hannah Adler, her cousin, now a neuro-ophthalmologist in Boston. Miriam faltered for a moment, then poured out everything, the girl's unusual reactions, the altered medical records. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was clear. Hannah was silent for a long time before replying. "Miriam, what you're describing sounds impossible. If the girls truly reacted that way, they're not completely blind. But are you certain? It could just be your imagination." "No, Hannah," Miriam insisted. "I saw it with my own eyes. They sensed light, even colors. You know as well as I do, if examined properly, the truth could be uncovered." Hannah sighed. "Do you realize what you're asking? If I interfere in a case already overseen by another doctor, I could lose my license. Collins has a strong reputation. He won't be easy to challenge." Miriam bit her lip, her voice breaking but fierce. "Hannah, these are 8-year-old girls. If you had seen their smiles after years in darkness, you'd understand why I can't walk away. Our great-grandmother once risked everything to save children during the war. Now it's our turn. You can refuse me, but I won't stop." The line went quiet. Miriam could almost hear her own heartbeat as she waited. Finally, Hannah spoke softly, her voice a mix of weariness and resolve. "All right, but it must be absolutely secret. I'll come to Vermont this weekend when Collins isn't there. We'll do the examination in private." Miriam closed her eyes, tears rolling down her cheeks. She whispered thanks, as if receiving newfound strength. The battle ahead would be dangerous, but now she had an ally. Together, they would begin to uncover the truth. That weekend, the Hayes estate felt heavier than usual. Alexander was busy with an important meeting at his architecture office in town, while Dr. Collins was away at a medical conference in New York. Miriam knew this was the only chance. At 10 o'clock sharp, a black car stopped at the gate. Out stepped Hannah Adler, dressed simply but carrying a professional case. To the outside world, she was introduced as a special education consultant, but Miriam and Hannah both knew that inside that case lay advanced medical tools for testing vision. The cousins embraced briefly before getting to work. Miriam led Hannah upstairs to Lily and Emma's room. The girls seemed timid at first, but when Miriam introduced Hannah as the lady who's here to play a new game, their faces softened with curiosity. Hannah opened her case, pulling out compact instruments, a retinal scope, light response cards, and a portable screen showing simple shapes. She worked carefully, patiently, as though afraid to break the fragile atmosphere of the room. "Lily, can you look this way?" Hannah shone a gentle light to the right. Lily's eyes shifted slightly. Hannah quickly noted it down. "Emma, what do you see when I bring this closer?" On the screen appeared a black and white circle. Emma hesitated, then whispered, "Something round, like a ball." Miriam gripped her hands together, eyes brimming with tears. Each reaction from the girls pierced the wall of despair that had stood for so long. After more than 2 hours of meticulous testing, Hannah packed away her instruments and took a deep breath. Just then, Alexander returned, stepping into the room with a curious expression. Before he could speak, Hannah addressed him, her voice filled with both emotion and anger. "Mr. Hayes, your daughters are not completely blind. They have about 40% of their vision intact. With proper intervention and stimulation, they can develop functional sight." The room fell silent. Alexander froze, his face pale. "What did you say? For 8 years, 15 of the best doctors told me they were completely blind." Hannah opened her laptop, displaying images of the girls' retinas. She pointed at the screen. "Look here. The optic nerve still has activity. The visual cortex is responding. There is no basis for a diagnosis of total blindness. The truth is, they overlooked these signals. Or worse, they chose to ignore them." Miriam could no longer hold back. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She whispered, "I knew it. I saw it myself. They sensed light, shadows, even colors." Alexander turned away, his trembling hand gripping the window frame. The world seemed to shift beneath him. For 8 years, he had been bound by a verdict of hopelessness. For 8 years, his daughters had lived in darkness, not just of their eyes, but of stolen belief. "You're telling me, all these years, they could have had a different life?" His voice cracked with anguish. Hannah nodded, eyes blazing with fury. "Yes, and someone must be held accountable for allowing this to happen." In that moment, Alexander caught Miriam's gaze, not just filled with compassion, but with unyielding strength. And for the first time in years, something stirred in his chest. The rebirth of true hope. 2 days after the secret examination, the iron gates of the Hayes estate shook with the sound of engines. Dr. Collins arrived, flanked by 2 colleagues and a lawyer. He stormed into the hall, his face flushed with rage, voice booming across the marble walls. "Mr. Hayes, I've been informed that an outsider has conducted unauthorized medical tests on my patients. This is an insult I will not tolerate." Alexander descended the staircase slowly, holding the folder Hannah had left behind. He was unhurried, yet his voice carried unshakable authority. "Dr. Collins, I want an explanation. Why did the first medical reports on my daughters clearly note light responsiveness, yet that detail mysteriously vanished in later records?" Collins faltered, then sneered. "Those notes were inconclusive. We confirmed repeatedly that the girls are completely blind. You're being deceived by an amateur's charade." From the shadows, Hannah stepped forward, presenting her medical ID and license. "I am Dr. Hannah Adler, a neuro-ophthalmologist, Harvard-trained. I examined the girls myself, and I have undeniable evidence. They retain 40% of their vision." The room erupted. Collins's face went pale, his words stumbling. That's impossible. I followed every protocol." "Protocols from 8 years ago," Hannah cut in sharply. "You used outdated equipment and ignored obvious signals. Worse, you erased initial notes from the records. This isn't just negligence, it borders on deliberate concealment." Miriam produced the copies of the old files she had secretly photographed. She fixed her gaze on Collins. "You can deny what I've seen, but you cannot deny your own handwriting." Sweat beaded on Collins' forehead, while his lawyer quickly interjected, "Mr. Hayes, Dr. Collins is a respected professional. You cannot destroy his reputation based on the words of a housemaid and an unfamiliar doctor." Alexander turned, his eyes blazing. "This isn't about words. This is evidence, and I will not allow anyone, least of all you, to rob my daughters of their chance. Collins, you and your team are officially dismissed, and I suggest you prepare for a lawsuit for medical negligence." Collins tried to protest, but Alexander had already turned his back. He was no longer the broken father of the past 8 years. He was a man who had found hope again, and would protect it with everything he had. As the doors slammed shut behind Collins, Miriam stood beside Alexander, her heart pounding. The air in the house shifted. The suffocating darkness of years past had begun to crack apart. In the days following the tense confrontation with Collins, the atmosphere inside the Hayes estate shifted dramatically. For the first time in years, the heavy curtains were drawn back, allowing sunlight to flood the once cold corridors. It was Miriam who suggested opening the windows, and Alexander did not object. He stood still, watching the rays pour in, as though trying to reacquaint himself with the light his family had unknowingly shut out for so long. Lily and Emma began attending special vision therapy sessions recommended by Hannah. Yet the most astonishing progress came during everyday moments. When Miriam took them into the garden, Emma squealed with delight as she noticed the sky was brighter than the darker corners of the house. When Lily touched a book with large letters for the first time, she exclaimed, "There are shadows and brightness here, like shapes." Each small discovery left Miriam breathless with emotion. But the greatest transformation was in Alexander himself. The man, once consumed by despair, had become an attentive, gentle father. He spent hours with his daughters, patiently playing the shadow-guessing game beneath the lamp, or simply walking hand in hand with them through the garden paths. One afternoon, Emma laughed out loud, holding up a crumpled sheet of paper, a large yellow circle scrawled against a field of blue. "I drew the sun," she announced proudly. Alexander stared at the drawing, his eyes filling with tears. In that instant, he knew his family had truly been reborn. Miriam watched quietly from behind, sensing the heavy weight in Alexander's heart slowly dissolving, replaced by the warmth the house had once lost. The laughter of Lily and Emma not only filled the empty halls of the estate, but also stitched together the deep wounds carved into their father's soul. From a place once drowned in shadows, the Hayes estate had become a home bathed in light. And Miriam understood this was only the beginning of a much longer journey ahead. As the months passed, the Hayes household was no longer just filled with children's laughter, but moved to a new rhythm, the rhythm of connection. Alexander often found himself drawn to the kitchen where Miriam brewed tea, or pausing by a window to listen as she told stories to Lily and Emma. At first it was gratitude, but slowly he realized his heart was rediscovering a feeling he thought had died with his wife, the warmth of love. One evening, after tucking Lily and Emma into bed, Alexander found Miriam in the garden. She sat on a wooden bench, gazing up at the star-strewn sky. Quietly, he sat beside her, remaining silent for a long time before softly saying, "Miriam, I don't know how to thank you. You haven't only changed my daughters' lives. You've changed mine, too." Miriam turned, her brown eyes glowing with gentleness. "I only did what my heart told me. The light was always there. It just needed someone to believe and to find it." In that moment, Alexander reached for her hand. No words were needed. Both understood that their bond had grown beyond gratitude. It was the start of something new, a love born from sorrow, but nurtured by faith and hope. A few months later, beneath the trees in the garden, Alexander and Miriam held a simple wedding. Lily and Emma clasped hands, radiant as two little angels. The ceremony was not extravagant, but it overflowed with sincerity. From that day forward, the Hayes family was not only reborn in light, but made whole by a love that had blossomed and would forever belong to them. What once was a house of silence had become a home of laughter, and in that home, hope would never be silenced again.